Hey all, Kurt Sasso here from TGT Web Comics with Jill Thompson, comic book artist extraordinaire at C2E2 day number 2 here. And you know, Jill's an amazing comic artist. She's done some beautiful work in Scary Godmother, many others that are so many numerous to name. And Jill, I just want to thank you very much for taking the time to help us out here today.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for asking to interview me. I may be interrupted every once in a while to sign something, but that's okay. It's like being at the convention, I suppose. Coming here and meeting me, will be interrupted. And
C2E2, it's an inaugural convention. You're a huge comic book artist. I've enjoyed your work with everything you've done. You know, why did you want to get into comics?
That's it's kind of a weird question to ask me right off the bat because I don't have an answer. It's something that I've always wanted to do. I've liked comics since I've been a really, really little girl, and it was one of the things that I always, like when someone would ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would say, I want to draw comics and be an archaeologist and be a veterinarian and be a ballerina and be a princess and and be a scientist and do all this stuff. And as I grew up, while I was still interested in all of those other things, they would keep falling away as the reality of, well, maybe I'm not interested in following through and doing that. But the one thing that I always loved constantly was drawing and drawing comics. So, everything else fell away. And it's not like, oh, I settled to be a comic book artist. It was the thing that I was just kind of really driven to do. I just want to tell stories in this medium. And as I grew up, I started out reading Archie comics. Well, no, first I started out reading Peanuts, so newspaper comic strips. And then you could find like all those little pocket books compilation of Peanuts stories. And then my father started bringing me home Archie comics from the newsstand. And he would also bring some other kind of comics home, like every once in a while because, I wanted my fix of comics, but they always didn't have a new comic out. So every once in a while he'd bring a superhero comic. But when I was really little, I thought they were scary comics because technically there was always some guy getting punched in the face or some kind of arg moment is happening, or there was like a villain or a monster, and it was like, to me when I was little, it was like they were scary. But as I kept growing up, there's a big pile of Archie comics that my brother and I would read, and interspersed there would be things that, I came to know as the X-Men and other things. And we'd reach down to try and find a comic we hadn't read before because we were reading them so often that we just kind of got used to, if we saw the cover, we would go, oh, that's the one where, Moose does this, or Jughead, blah, blah, blah. We would know the story by just what was in the cover. So there was nothing even remotely of a surprise in the books anymore. So finally one day I broke down and I took out a scary comic because I really wanted to read something I hadn't read before. And that was I guess, Archie comics was my gateway drug to the rest of the comic book world. And then superhero comics I totally fell in love with, and I think, moved along to, going to the drugstore by myself and finding all these different comics. And then somebody told me, well, there's this comic book store that's over in the town next to you. And it's like, comic book store? What's that? And, forayed into, the dark, dingy, musty-smelling comic book store, which supposedly girls are supposed to be afraid to go in. But I walked into it and this place is like heaven on earth, It was like, and then got introduced to independent comics and foreign comics and manga in 2000 AD and all this other kind of stuff. And also spent like all my babysitting money on, back issues because at one point I was a super, I have to collect. And so I have all these and X-Men was my favorite. So I needed every John Byrne, Chris Claremont X-Men comic that was out there because that was my first superhero comic.
And